So my name is Daniel, and I am the pastor here at West Hills and the director of the Garden of Hope. We started this about 4 years ago when our church was looking for, one of the things Jesus says is, let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So one of the things we just asked ourselves is, what are the good works that we're doing that the community at large sees? And if our church were to close its doors and cease to exist, would it be missed? Would anybody notice that we were gone? And so we started talking about ways that we could become a real and true and genuine blessing to our neighbors with no strings attached. Okay, this is just a way that we began to figure out how do we love our neighbors well. So we started the Garden of Hope. All the workshops that we do here are at no cost. We have about 90 raised beds out here in the backyard that we allow people to use at no cost. Everything that we're going to teach you how to do today is already done for you if you choose to come and grow with us. Last year we had 26 families out here growing gardens with us. And they didn't pick enough tomatoes. By golly, they didn't understand that when I said this is going to work, some of them were like, I don't know how well it's going to work. And so they picked their tomatoes until like August, and then they got done. They were like, okay, it's hot, and I'm tired, and I've eaten enough tomatoes. And then we probably threw away or donated or gave away probably 500 pounds of tomatoes last year. What you're going to experience if you do this well, generally speaking, if you follow instructions, you will avoid all of the mistakes that I have already made for you. Okay? And going, that didn't work. Generally speaking, everything that I know I learned from books or blogs. Okay, I started by like the way we all do. I just planted a garden and saw what happened and went, this sucks. As the weeds took over and I lost everything, I went, why are we trying this? It's a whole lot simpler to go to the market and buy tomatoes at the farmer's market. And then a friend of mine said, hey, have you read? And I went, no, I haven't read a book on gardening. I have a degree in physics, so I have a science background. I haven't read anything. So I went and I got the book, and then I got a bunch of books, and I read a bunch of books, and then I started reading gardening blogs, and the kind of whole thing snowballed from there. And then about 7 years ago, I built my first raised bed garden at my house. And then I went, wow, this is easy. Because for me, as a dad with young children, my kids are 9, 6, and 1. It needed to be something that I could manage in an hour a week. So I needed to be able to not lose my life in the garden. It's something that I love and I enjoy, but I needed to not be able to, I didn't have 10 hours a week to devote to taking care of a garden. I personally manage 12 raised beds like the ones we're going to talk about today at my house in under an hour a week. Okay, it's not time consuming if you do it right. And so we're going to talk about what it means to do it right. There are limitations, okay? This is not rocket science. There are things you cannot grow well in a raised bed, okay? We'll talk about that too. But for most of the things that you think about in a typical home vegetable garden, most of that stuff you can grow in a raised bed. And so we're going to talk about bed size and all the different things that go in today. But I'm going to pray, bless our time, and then we'll dive in. Father in heaven, I thank you for the privilege that we have to be here today. I thank you for these folks who've shown up. I thank you for West Hills and the ministry that you've given us here. I thank you for the Garden of Hope and the blessing it's been to so many lives these last couple of years. I pray that today is a time that honors you. Lord, I pray that we would learn well. And Lord, I just pray that you'd allow us to continue to be a blessing to our community. In Christ's name, amen. All right, so let's talk about why raised beds. I get asked this question a lot. I mean, people send me messages. Can you grow? Does it have to be raised beds? The answer is no. There are other ways to do this. But raised beds do a couple of things. They shrink the space you have to care for. The very first raised bed garden that I grew was 30 by 30. Okay, that's not very big. But let me just tell you how many weeds grow in a 30 by 30 garden. Bazillions, okay? And if you think 30 by 30 is 900 square feet, okay, there's easy math. 30 by 30 is a 900 square foot garden. You can grow the same quantity of produce in four by 4 raised beds. I promise you, you can grow the same as 900 square feet of row garden in 4 by 4 raised beds. So you're talking about, that's 16 square feet times 4. So you can grow the same amount of produce in 64 square feet as in 900 square feet if you do it right. And can I just tell you that it's a whole lot easier to care for 64 square feet than it is 900. Okay, everything is simpler. The watering is simpler. The weeding is simpler. And the produce will grow. So basic science, what does a plant need to survive? The only thing a plant needs to survive is sunlight, water, and adequate nutrients in the soil. That's it. I mean, you need water, sun, and fertilizer. Okay, those are the only three things that a plant needs to survive. And so if you can give a plant adequate sunlight, adequate nutrition, and adequate water, it'll grow anywhere. This is the whole nature of hydroponics. Hydroponics are really cool. Have you ever seen a lettuce plant at the store and you're like, hey, why does it have this little bitty square roots on it? Because it grew in a little bitty square in a top of a pipe. And because if they give it sunlight and if they give it adequate nutrition, it'll grow. About 90% of the tomatoes that you eat fresh, okay, not canned tomatoes, but about 90% of the fresh tomatoes that you eat spend their entire life in an 8-inch pot. Okay, they grow in a pot this big. And I got to tour one of those greenhouse farms where they were growing all of these full-size tomato plants in little pots like this. And I went, really? And he went, yes, because if you give it sunlight, nutrition, and moisture, it's going to grow. And so what we've done in raised bed gardening, we use square foot gardening. Okay, we started with Mel Bartholomew's square foot gardening method. We've changed and adapted over the years and improved on some great concepts that are there based on reading a whole bunch of other books. And went, hey, we can improve this and this and this. But we start with kind of a square foot gardening concept. The idea is more and less. It's really just going, this is how they grow stuff in greenhouses. Can we adapt that to grow outdoors? And the answer is absolutely. So we grow in a 4x4 raised bed. Ours are all 4x4s, technically 4x3.5. Don't tell anybody I said that. And the reason is because if you're an average height person, you can reach this far. You know how far that is on the average person? 2 feet. That's right. So if you grow in a 4x4 raised bed, you can reach everything in that raised bed without stepping into the raised bed. So you don't have any soil compaction. One of the things that prevents a row garden from growing well is the soil gets squished out because you're walking between it trying to pull the weeds, and the soil gets really compacted and it weights itself down. And so a 4x4 raised bed works really well. You can cheat and go to 4x8s if you must. Okay, saves you about $3 in materials to go to 4x8s. So if you want to go to 4x8s, you can do that. They do get a little trickier in terms of trying to figure the layouts out. I'm just saying they kind of be a little wonkier in layouts. 4x4s are easy. 4x4s produce a tremendous amount of produce. I did a YouTube video a couple of years ago before we were doing any of the Garden of Hope stuff, on how to grow 250 pounds of tomatoes in 16 square feet. Because at the beginning of this process, I figured out I can grow 8 tomato plants in a 4x4 raised bed and produce somewhere around 30 pounds per plant. So running right at 250 pounds of tomatoes in a 4x4 raised bed. That requires a little bit more work to prune them and that sort of thing, but it works. And so what we're going to do is we use 4x4s. The other thing is, if you're using a 4x4, it's 16 square feet. We're not talking about a huge ton of dirt, okay? Because the most expensive part of the whole process is going to be soil mix. Depth, 7 to 8 inches, okay? You only need 7 to 8 inches. I get people all the time ask, don't you think they'd do better if they had 12? No. Ask me how. I got some 12-inch beds at the house. Can I tell you they yield nothing more than the 8-inch beds? But can I tell you that the difference between 8 and 12 is 33%? Okay, that's 33% more cost on the front end for your soil mix to go in the beds. Okay, and to me, it doesn't help. Now, there are a few things that are limited to an 8-inch bed. If you're growing carrots in an 8-inch bed, and you should, grow short ones. Okay, don't grow the coyote longs, the big coyote reds that grow 14 inches long. If you got 7 inches of dirt, they go down and they turn right. True story. They're going to go down and go, and you're going to pull out carrots. They all look like elves, okay? Sweet potatoes the same way. Look and see if there's an L-shaped sweet potato in that bin right there. Those are sweet potatoes left over from last year. Robert, just peek in there and see if there's an L. There may not be any L-shaped ones, but sweet potatoes are kind of the same way. You can grow sweet potatoes in a raised bed. But So if you're growing sweet potatoes, they get to the bottom of the 8 inches and they turn. So now you got an L shape. So you can grow things that grow bigger than in 8 inches of soil, but you do run limits a little bit. Okay. But you can grow sweet potatoes successfully. You just have to understand they're going to come out shaped like an L. Cut them up and go on. The 8 inches of soil is plenty. Bed materials. Okay, what do you build the beds out of? Okay, you can. We'll go from cheapest to most expensive. You can build them out of treated plywood or treated lumber. Pressure treated lumber is going to be your cheapest bet. People go, what about leaching? Okay, and I'm going to tell you the truth. Yes, there's a little tiny bit of leaching from the pressure treated into the soil, but the likelihood that it gets from the wood into the dirt, into the plant, and from the plant into the fruit and into you is nil. Okay, like the likelihood that that happens in any significant quantity is 0. So you can use pressure treated. We use concrete blocks. There's some stuff about concrete blocks. There's panic on the internet. Don't use concrete blocks for your raised beds. Okay, they work just fine. There again, like the leaching issue is not significant enough to actually end up in the fruit enough in significant enough quantities for it to ever be a danger to you. I would not use landscape timbers, okay? You can use them, like, they're loaded with creosote. They're just dangerous to be around, so don't use, or sorry, not landscape timbers, railroad ties. I wouldn't use railroad ties. Railroad ties are full of creosote. Creosote does leach. Don't use those, okay? If you're using treated, you can also use, cedar. You can get on the Facebook Marketplace and buy rough cut lumber. You can buy boards that are a little bit cheaper. You can buy oak boards. You can buy rough cut cedar. All of those things will work. You can buy little kits on the internet that are 4x4 raised beds kits. You can buy them on Amazon for about $50, and those will work. Blocks are long term. If you use non-treated lumber, it will rot. Ask me how I know. And it will rot faster than you thought it would. Okay, because I just used some cheap Tubus 8s one year, and they just rotted pretty quick. So I don't recommend using just non-treated stuff. Pallet wood. You could use pallet wood. Pallets, hardwood, so pallets, oak, it's going to last longer than Doug fir or whatever. So you can probably get 3 to 5 years out of pallets if you use pallets, where you've hacked them up. And there again, you're only looking for about 8 inches of height. So a 2x8 works well. Now, bottoms. Okay, we use the last of the landscape fabric, so I apologize because I meant to have some for show and tell, but it's all into the bush out there. We put bottoms in our raised beds. So when we prep the area to put in a raised bed, we take out all the grass, okay, like with a shovel, okay, and get it down and get it square and flat, okay, and then we're going to put our bed in. We put bottoms in our raised beds. We use a premium 5mm landscape fabric that you can buy. There's nobody in town that sells it. I'm sorry, though, there is, but the commercial guys are pretty stinking high on that. You have to go to a commercial guy to buy it. Amazon has it, but it looks like a tarp, okay? And if you need a cheap option, a cheapo tarp from Harbor Freight will work, okay? You can buy a 5x7 that you can cut down to 4x4 for about $3, all right? But basically, we're using a bottom, and we're using a tarp essentially. We're using a premium landscape fabric in ours. I think we paid $50 for a roll enough to do 20 beds or something. So it's not super expensive, but a cheap tarp will work. The reason for that is you're going to put it flat, so it's going to hold some water initially inside your bed. So it's going to provide a level of moisture retention, but it also suppresses the weeds coming up through. Okay, so what you don't want is the grass and the junk that you just removed to come back up through your raised bed. Can I just tell you that's a nightmare? Ask me how I know. All right, so if you don't put a bottom in them, some of the weeds are going to come up they're going to come all the way up. They're going to grow through 8 inches of topsoil, and they're going to emerge, and they're going to be happy as can be because you put all this nice dirt on top of them, and they're going to be like, yay, we got fertilizer, we're happy, and then they're a nightmare to get out. Put a bottom in. And a premium landscape fabric, a cheap tarp will work. You're like, what about water? Okay, you're building in a raised bed. You are never going to have too much water, okay, unless you build it in the swamp. Like you expect in Tennessee, like you're going to have up on the hill, you're going to have a yaller in the swamp. Like,
So there's no way we're going to drown it. That's not.
no, like they're not, because what you're going to do is you're going to raise that sucker 8 inches out of the ground, okay? Which means the water is going, excess water is going to sag out to ground level all the time. So if you have too much water, if you overwater them, if like last June, if it rains every day in June last year, like because you're in a raised bed, the excess water is going to run out the bottom, and it's going to run sideways out the bottom, but they're not going to flood, okay? And so you're not going to have any flooding issues in a raised bed. You do have a little bit of drying issues. We'll talk to that in a minute. And generally speaking, when we're talking about a note on irrigation, because it's not in there. We've added since last year. I'm doing an irrigation workshop in 6 weeks. I don't remember what the date is. I think it's April 18th, off the top of my head. I will do a drip irrigation workshop because I recommend drip irrigation. You can build an entire drip irrigation system for like $50 for your entire garden. We have one here. I'm happy to show you when we get done. I'll show you what we did with the drip system. But drip irrigation is now cheap and readily available, and you will never have to water your garden again. You put it on a little timer, right, and it waters your garden, and it waters super duper precisely. Because we are using a 4x4 raised bed, okay, that's 16 square feet. 16 square feet to get an inch of water is roughly 7.5 gallons, all right? Is the equivalent of an inch of rainfall. That's not very much. Okay, we use a pressure compensating emitter that allows the irrigation system to release 2 gallons of water per hour. Turn on the system, and we can measure very precisely an inch of rainfall by running the system for about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. We can also tell exactly how much water it needs by using this nifty little gadget called a moisture meter, which is in the shed that I didn't bring in. Sorry, I have a little moisture meter. So we're like, hey, it rained this week. Do we need to run the drip system? Like, go to. Put the little moisture meter in and measure. She's not here, so I can tell on her. I had a lady last year who kept talking about how her plants were not doing as well. Like, and she's looking at the plants around hers out there, and like, she's like, my plants are not doing as well as everybody else's. And I said, what are you doing to them? And like, because I'm here all the time. So what have you done to them? She says, well, nothing. I said, did you water them? Yes. I said, why? She said, because the soil looked dry. I said, let me meet you up there. Let me just show you something. It's like, we're on a drip system. Every bed out there is drip irrigated, which means if Alan flips on the switch, everybody gets water, okay? They get exactly the same amount of water because we're using pressure compensation. Like, I come out there, and she's been watering her little stuff because it looked dry. Like, I put the little moisture meter in her bed. Everybody was drowning. Like, it was in the wet, soggy end of that happens after a thunderstorm, but it should not be normal. Like, your bed should dry out a little bit between waterings, and she wasn't letting it dry out at all. And so all her little plants were sitting there drowning. Like, you shouldn't drown them in a raised bed system unless you just decide I'm going to water them every day because they need it. No, they don't need it. Like, twice a week is probably plenty, but you can tell with a little moisture meter, and it's super precise, and you can go, hey, I'm down on the dry end. Turn on the... It's still in the green. Don't water them today. And you're only using 7.5 gallons once a week. I can promise you, if you use a drip system on your water, you will never see it in your water bill. You use more water flushing the toilet in a day than you're going to use the running the drip system in a week. Okay? So just it's not going to show up. Let's talk about soil mix because this is kind of the secret sauce. How do you build the right soil mix? Part of the reason I got into raised bed growing and out of the old school garden planting is because when I moved here, my clay is evil, okay? What I have at my house is this wicked, sticky orange stuff. I'm like, and I couldn't figure out how to get enough organic matter into that orange stuff to actually improve it. And I was going, how many truckloads of stuff am I going to have to bring in? For my yard, I brought 10 tri-axle truckloads. I'm not kidding. So I have a half-acre yard, and I wanted grass. So there's a guy who runs a horse stable up here. I said, how much horse manure do you have? He said, how much do you need? I said, I need 10 truckloads. So I paid a guy with a 4-wheel drive backhoe and a dump truck, And I carried 250 cubic yards of horse manure and buried my entire yard 6 inches deep. I have the greenest grass in the neighborhood. But that wasn't tenable for the garden because I didn't want to be just growing in the horse stuff. You know, like it's okay, it's limited, but I didn't want that to be my garden. So I went, what do we do? We're just going to plant on top of it. Put the beds on top, like mine are raised beds. So you put the tarp down, the beds up. And then we're going to fill them with a premium grow mix. All right, now what is a premium grow mix? If you go buy it from Mize, you can buy Pro Mix. You can buy a 4 cubic foot bag of Pro Mix up there for about $30 for 4 cubic feet. I don't recommend it because you're going to spend $7.50 a cubic foot for Pro Mix. But that's what the professional greenhouse guys are using, okay? Like in their little pots. It works really well. We can build it for about $1.50 a cubic foot, okay? And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to build our own grow mix. Key components of a grow mix, all right? The best soil mix, these measurements are for a 4x4 raised bed. It's approximately 5 cubic feet of coco coir, 5 cubic feet of blended compost, and 2 cubic feet, of course, vermiculite. So, for reference, 2 cubic feet is roughly 3 5-gallon buckets. If you need a measuring tool, because sometimes you're like, how do I measure this into cubic feet? Use a bucket. It's about 3 5-gallon buckets worth. But let's talk about each of those components real fast. All right, so this is my show and tell. The one I get the most questions about is what is coarse vermiculite, okay? It's this bag. This is a 4 cubic foot bag of coarse vermiculite. It costs about $25. The only people in town that sell it are Mize Farm and Garden in Gray, okay? If you find somebody else that sells it, let me know, but they're the only ones that carry it. But it all comes from the same place. It is a mined element. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Now, you've probably seen the fluffy white stuff in potting mix, right? The fluffy white stuff in potting mix is called perlite. Perlite is pretty similar to coarse vermiculite, okay? It looks kind of like oyster shell. It's shiny and it's silvery and it's fun, and you can look at it after. By all means, come play in the coarse vermiculite. It feels really fun. It is a mined mineral that's heated and popped. It's nutrient nil. It doesn't change the soil in any way, except that it keeps the soil from getting compacted, and it holds moisture when the water drains off the sides. Coarse vermiculite, all the little pieces on the edge of it hold water. Okay, so it helps with water retention. It helps to keep the soil nice and fluffy. And perlite, anybody ever seen what happens to perlite if you use it in a garden? Bloats. It's like styrofoam. You're like, hey, it snowed in my garden, after a thunderstorm. No, because all the perlite floated. Of course, vermiculite does not float. So it's like I want to say it's $1 more a bag for vermiculite versus perlite. It's worth the buck. Okay, it doesn't float. And it's available. Can you get by without using it? Yes, but you're going to see it in your results. Okay, like you can cheat this one and skip it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Ask me how I know. Okay, like I've tried all of these things. Like in Mel's original mix, he uses this in a third. He uses a third quantity, and I don't think you have to have quite that much. I've done really well with 2 cubic feet, which is a half a bag per raised bed. Okay, but I use about 2 cubic feet of that. Coco coir. Let me do this. All right. Gene, would you move my iPad right out from in front of me so I don't drop crap all over it? That'd be helpful. Thanks, sir. Okay, so let's talk about coco coir. Coco coir is the brown husks off of coconut, okay? So this is what happens when all you coconut oil lovers eat the coconut oil, but what happens to the husks, man? They got pounds and pounds of those. They grind them into a fantastic substrate that they're using in greenhouse growing, okay? Coco coir is the best stuff on the market. It's a little more expensive than peat, but I would recommend it in a heartbeat. We're in the process of switching our stuff over. It is never hydrophobic, which means peat moss, which we use. Okay, if you can't get coir, you use peat moss. This is the big bag of peat moss. Okay, you can buy this bag at Lowe's for about $11. Okay, And you can use peat moss. Peat moss works really well because peat moss is nutrient neutral, but it holds a lot of water. So what we're trying to do is, in a raised bed, we're trying to retain moisture for as long as possible and keep it in the root zone where the plants can use it. And this is in your cheap potting mixes. About 90% of what's in cheap potting mixes is just peat moss. Okay. Now, how many of you ever had a house plant that you tried to water and you poured the water on and the water went? Okay. You're like, hey, I got this. Okay, my mother-in-law died in January, and people gave us these house plants, and I love outside stuff. Okay, I'm all about a garden. Me and house plants are not friends. Okay. I have killed every single one I've owned save one. I got one little oxalis that has lasted for 14 years. But everything else I've had as a houseplant has died. But most of the cheap houseplants come in peat moss. So if you let the peat moss get dry and you go pour the water on it, where's the water go? Everywhere but in the soil. It just it dries into a brick. Okay. In the summertime, on a 90-degree day, if you have a high quantity of peat moss and you don't have the top of your soil mulched and it rains, it goes poof, and it will run off the sides and it won't saturate in. You can avoid that by keeping the top of your bed mulched well and retaining the moisture, because as long as peat moss stays damp, it doesn't do that. But as soon as it gets really hard and dry because you forgot to flip on the irrigation or you forgot to go water or whatever, and you got, hey, we got this nice thunderstorm, well, your peat moss might lose some of your water actually in that setup. So we're switching. Coco coir does not do that at all. I don't care how dry coco coir gets. If you go out and put water on it, it holds it. So we're switching to that. You can buy it on, like, you can't buy it locally, but you can buy it online. You can buy it on Amazon. I pulled this one up. So you can buy it. This is a new one. You can buy it from Hort Americas, because Hort Americas has it cheap. So you can buy a 5-kilogram block. Okay, there again, in the world of conversions, how much is that? Okay, 5-kilogram blocks are about this big. Okay, like once they're inflated with water, they're about this size. So a 5-kilogram block is about 2.5 to 3 cubic feet when it's inflated. So you buy it in 5 cubic foot blocks. If you buy them on Amazon, they're about $17 or $18 for a 5 cubic foot block versus an $11 bag of peat moss. It's a little more money. But if you buy them on Hort Americas, they're like $6.50. This is $6.65 a block. Okay, the catch-22 is shipping. Okay, they're not gonna prime ship it to you at $6.65 a block. So you got to buy at least 4 to make it worthwhile. I think the shipping is $25, but it's $25 if you buy 1, 2, 3, 4, or 8. Okay, so if you buy 8 of them, you can get them down under $100. Go in with a friend and say, we need to buy some coco coir for our raised beds, and you can get them for under 10. You can actually get them cheaper than peat moss, at which point it makes it worthwhile to switch. Yep. This is Hort Americas. If you will type in Google 5-kilogram coir block, it will give you lots of shopping choices. But this one's Hort Americas, and I can tell you from experience that the shipping's $25. Yep.
Are you going to completely switch it out, or are you just going to add your cocoa and your nude and coffee and tea? How are you going to blend it?
As in the existing beds, as our world sags out, okay, so over time your beds are going to sag a little bit, we're just adding coco coir into the mix. Okay. I'm not going to dig them all. You can. If you ever have a real disease issue, this is the other thing. If you have a 4x4 raised bed and you ever have a real nasty disease, like you get something that shouldn't be there, okay? You get root rot nematodes, or you get vermiculum, or what's the V? Vercillium wilt, that's the one. You can take all the mix out, throw it away, sterilize the bed with vinegar or bleach, both of which are safe in the short term, and put new mix in your bed and start over. You don't have to move your entire garden. If you did it in a row garden and you got Vercillium wilt, you're screwed. Okay, so you can just, in a raised bed, you can just replace the soil mix and start over. Out here, I'm just adding coir in. And then, okay, so the mix is, we use about 5 cubic feet. That's roughly 2 bricks of coir. We use about 2 cubic feet of the coarse vermiculite, and then we use about 5 cubic feet of blended compost. Let's talk about what blended compost is. So compost So compost is what happens when all of the plant stuff rots down into usable nutrient-dense material. We use a heck of a lot of the leaf compost from the town of Jonesboro. The reason being, so the town of Jonesboro takes the leaves from the fall leaf collection, they run it through a grinder and double grind it into compost, and then they sell it to you for cheap. It works really well. It works better if it's had a year to sit, okay? But most of you, if you go buy it, it's sold by the scoop, okay? Don't you love all these new measures you're getting? How much is a scoop? A scoop of leaf mulch from the town of Jonesboro is 2 cubic yards. It's about 55 cubic feet. It's enough to make your raised beds and your raised beds and your raised beds and your raised. It's enough for everybody in the room. Okay, what you do with that is put it in find the spot in the corner of your yard and leave it sit and use it for the next 4 years. Okay, as the worms work through it, it's going to break down better and better. It's still going to be compost, and it's going to improve. Actually, year 2, 3 is really kind of the best years. Yes, they will deliver within reason. So, I mean, they're not going to go to you in Mountain City, but they will deliver. And I think there's a $20 delivery charge or whatever, but it's still cheaper than buying some of the other options. Okay, don't buy.
Where in Jonesboro can you get this?
It is sold by the solid waste. So you go into town hall and you have to pay where you pay your water bill. And then you take the ticket down to the solid waste people, which is down here off Main Street. And you need to take a trailer. You need to understand that 2 cubic feet is a lot. So make sure you take a big trailer or rent a trailer or pay them to deliver it. Because 2 cubic yards is 56 cubic feet. A 4x8 trailer 3 feet deep. I mean, it's big. So, and the other things you can use. You can absolutely use composted horse manure. That's old horse manure. Don't use the green stuff, but you can use older stuff. Older stuff works great in small quantities. You can use cow manure if it's old. Don't use anything like an old, at least a year old. Cow manure tends to have too much salt in it, and the salt can be a mess. So be careful with cow manure, but it is usable. You can use horse manure, cow manure, that stuff. You can buy the Black Cow is usually readily available. Black Cow works for, it's roughly a 40-pound bag is about a cubic foot. You can buy a bag of Black Cow. That stuff works pretty well because it's already washed. It doesn't have the salt in it, and it's been heated to make sure it doesn't have weed seeds. Do not buy the cheap Scott's stuff at Walmart. Ask me how I know. Okay, don't do that. You get in a hurry and you go up there and you're like, I'm going to buy the cheap stuff because I don't have any money today. You'd be better to just not, okay? Because it's going to come full of weed seeds and sand. And that is, both of those things are useless in your raised bed mix. You don't want them. Ideally, you're going to have a little bit of all of these things. So a little bit of aged horse manure, a little bit of primarily the leaf compost because it actually has some browns and stuff. It is probably better than some of the other options. You can get mushroom compost. Mushroom compost works really well. Mushroom compost is typically horse manure that's been run through the composting cycle.
Where would you get it at? Where would you get mushroom compost?
Onks. Mize, Onks. There's a couple of greenhouse, garden supply places that sell that. Last I, it's been a while, but last I looked, Onks had it by the dump truck load. And the Onks is up in Gray. All right, so homemade is best. I did the composting workshop a month ago. We're 4 weeks out from the composting workshop. It's rained for the last month, so my homemade compost bin is still sitting on the front porch. Because every day that I've had to come up here, it has been pouring down rain, and I have been thoroughly unmotivated to move it out there. However, making your own compost is absolutely the best way to go because you can mix the blend as you want. The gist of it is use roughly even parts, greens and browns. The greens are vegetables, grass clippings, green leaves. The browns are old paper, leaves, tiny bits of cardboard if you run it through a shredder, something like that. Then you want to mix them, and you want to mix them we're early enough in the season. If you're like, hey, I'm building new raised beds and I'm going to put them in May, you can go put you a compost bin together like the one on the front porch. You can do it out of pallets. You can look at that one and figure out how I did that. And you can create your own compost in 6 weeks, because if you turn it every day, it'll take about 3 days to heat up initially, and then you turn it every day and it'll turn into compost in about 6 weeks. I'll be glad to answer the composting questions after, but homemade is best because you can control what goes in it and make sure you didn't put any poisons in it. And ultimately, each year you're going to add compost to the mix and probably nothing else. You never need to add the vermiculite. It's never going away. It doesn't dissolve. It doesn't wash out. It's always going to be there. We're adding a little bit of cocoa coir, trying to add it into the mix, but you don't have to because we didn't start with cocoa coir since ours were primarily peat. Like, we're adding a little bit of cocoa coir every year. What happens is, over the year, the compost gets used. It actually goes, it's plant food, so it actually goes into the plants and goes away. When you pick the tomatoes, you're actually carrying off some of the compost. So the beds are going to drop sometimes as much as 2 inches in a year. Which means we're going to come back and you're not going to add any more vermiculite next year. You're not going to add any more cocoa coir if that's what you build it out of. We're going to go back and we're going to add compost the next year. So each year over year, you're just going to add some more compost, because that's basically what we're using for plant food. But let me accelerate just a little and talk a little bit about plant food. In this system, you don't need very much, but we've had success adding small quantities of plant food. So we're using Job's Organics. You can buy, this bag's about $16 and it will last you for 2 or 3 years. We use 2 cups per 4x4 raised bed. And I have a Cookout special milkshake cup that's about 2 cups. And I use that as my measuring tool. And I put about 2 cups on each bed at the beginning of the year. And that's what we're using for fertilizer. You can buy, a lot of the hardcore tomato people recommend Tomato Tone, which I've had good success with. I haven't seen a ton of difference between the Job's Organics and the Tomato Tone, but I've had some folks who really think that there's a difference, and you can certainly use Tomato Tone. It's an excellent garden fertilizer. But that's it. Okay. Hey, Azomite. How many of you ever seen a tomato with a black end? Okay, you went and you grew these, you worked so hard to get your tomatoes, and you went out to pick it, and it's like red, and then on the bottom it's black as coal. And you went, somebody's been in my tomatoes, what happened? That's blossom end rot. Okay, blossom end rot happens when there is a water deficiency in the soil. People are like, it's calcium. Yeah, it's related to calcium, but it's actually more related to the fact that the plant can't absorb the calcium because it didn't have the right moisture level in the soil. So if you keep the moisture level at an even moisture, there's generally going to be enough calcium in the soil to eliminate blossom end rot. So there's all kinds of solutions for how to cure it. It's like spray it with Tums and add some Epsom salts, and those things work. Okay, Epsom salts in small doses is okay. That's magnesium sulfate. But I would recommend, we use Azomite. Okay, Azomite stays in the soil for a very long period of time. This is what it looks like, this bag of Azomite. Azomite is this fluffy white powder. It is a mined mineral out of Utah. And Azomite kind of looks like Tums that have been crushed up. It has lots of micronutrients in it. And it has a pretty complex mineral profile. We use about 2 cups per raised bed when we're starting, and then I don't add any, okay? There again, it doesn't get used by the plants in significant quantities. We do add about 2 cups of Azomite for each new raised bed. And there again, you can buy that one online. Unfortunately, if you try to buy it locally, they're going to want as much for a little bitty amount as they're going to want for a 40-pound bag on Amazon. Okay, you can buy. I think that 40-pound bag was like $10, $20. It's not very much. And that word, last one, vermicompost, worm poop. Okay, worm poop is the best fertilizer on the planet. I reckon we did this at the composting workshop, but that's my worm bin down there. Hang on. Come here, guys. Oh, there they go. So these little guys are red wigglers, okay? They're very happy. So these little red wigglers eat their body weight every single day, okay? So a simple worm bin made out of a tub and some worms from Jim's Worm Farm, will produce enough micro fertilizers. So how much worm poop do I use? I don't put it in the bed, okay? When I'm transplanting my things out, so when I'm planting my tomatoes and I'm planting my beans and peas, then I add the worm poop to the hole, okay? How much? This much. However big my hand is, that's how much worm poop I put in the hole. I mean, some of this is not super scientific, okay? Like, hey, take some worm poop out of the worm bin, put it in the hole. But the scientific data says roughly 20% of the soil mix, 20 to 40% of the soil mix will see if you mix 20% in and around that, you're going to see a significant increase. I would say when we started using worm poop as a primary fertilizer, I saw as much as a 20 to 30% increase in the yield in my tomato plants. That's a lot. So if you have a plant if you're generally getting, let's just say 20 tomatoes from a tomato plant, and all of a sudden you got 30 tomatoes from the same plant, it was worthwhile. Worm castings are crazy expensive if you go buy them. I will warn you, I think the last time I looked at a 40-pound bag of worm clippings, they were $50 or $60 for a bag of worm castings. They take about 3 months to produce, so I understand that the guy who's doing it has some time involved. So it's cheaper to just buy you some worms and put them in a bin. I feed my worms coffee grounds and kitchen scraps. I think there's probably I'm not digging through there at the moment, but there's things in there that I'm feeding them. There's a cantaloupe rind or something. You're welcome to dig through the worm bin, get your hands dirty in a minute. I recommend vermicompost worm poop as the primary fertilizer that we use. It's what I rely on most of all. So compost and vermicompost in a blend, and that's my soil mix. Okay, are there questions about what we put in it? Yep.
You said for the vermicompost, you don't put it in when you actually do the bed, you only put it in when you...
At planting time, yep. So when I'm planting, okay, and we'll get to what we're planting and how many and what. But if I'm transplanting, let's say I'm putting in tomatoes or peppers or whatever, okra, and I'm transplanting them into the garden, I put a handful. If I'm planting beans, for example, or carrots or whatever, then I'll take my handful and I'll mix it into the square at planting time. Because I'm not going to stick them, I'm not putting a handful per carrot, okay? But I'll put a handful per tomato, per carrot. So I'll mix it in right at planting time. And you can top dress with it later in the year if you want. So if your stuff's doing really, really well and you want to try to get one last big flush of produce in the fall, you can absolutely top dress in August, which means you go to the bottom of the plant and you put some more worm poop on the top, and it works really, really well. Other questions about what goes in the soil mix?
Excuse me, are these the same thing as earthworms?
No, they are not. They are different. Earthworms like to live in deep dirt, okay? And they come up when they're drowning, okay? So when we've had a heavy rain and all the worms come up, that's because they're drowning and they're trying to breathe. It's why the birds are all like, yay, it's raining, and all of the rest of us are like, please let the sun shine. Okay, the birds are really thrilled because the earthworms are coming up because they're drowning. Earthworms will not stay in a bin. Red wigglers, they'll live in that bin forever. Okay, they're pretty hard to kill as long as you don't let them freeze or let them get over 130 for too long. Ask me how I know. Had some days last year where my greenhouse got up around 130 after I'd moved out my tomatoes because I really wasn't paying attention, but I forgot that the worms were in the greenhouse. Hey, they still lived. I mean, like, I baked them pretty good, but they still survived. And so they're pretty tough little critters. All right, let's talk about, and I'll answer any of those questions that you have. Shoot me an email, ask me a message, whatever. I'll answer all your questions about grow mix, but I got to roll because it is 10:50. All right, okay, trellises. Okay, we have experimented with lots of trellises. Can I just tell you, this is the best thing going, all right? This is a cattle panel from Tractor Supply that I took a pair of bolt cutters and cut in half. They come in 16-foot lengths. They're about $20 for a cattle panel. They're made out of galvanized metal. And what we do with them is we take a cattle panel, cut it in half. Hey, you got my name tag. And then we take a pair of T-posts, like this one. Now for the moment, I can't pound my T-post in the ground, so I'm going to cheat. Bend it. So we put the T-post in the ground. We lean the cattle panel back like this, And that's what we use to support our stuff. We put these on the back side. And so somebody asked me about how do you tell what north is? North is where the shade is all day long, okay? So you're going to put your trellis on the back side. Now, how do you figure that out? Like, I'll tell you in a minute. But, like, this is how you can put whatever you want on this trellis. Can I just tell you, at my house, I live on a ridge top, and I get straight line winds. It is not uncommon, like in the last week when it was windy, for us to get some 60-mile-an-hour winds blowing across the hilltop. Can I tell you that the first time, my first round of trellises that ended up in the neighbor's yard with all my tomatoes on them, that was not good. We had to build something stronger. So this is what I came up with. We've been using for years. You can put 100 pounds of tomatoes on this, or squash. Anybody ever grown a really big winter squash? I've got a 20-pound one sitting in my trunk at the moment because I forgot to take it out. But I got a big old winter squash out there. I'll show you after. Like, it will hang right here in the air. Like, it will not bend the trellis. It will not go anywhere. So we use these. We grow pole beans on them. Like, can I tell you, if the pole beans are growing and you have a trellis like this, you know how easy it is to pick them? Like Miss Mary and Dorothy are sisters that go to church here, and we have a garden out here that they use. And they'll come out here and pick their own beans, man. Like these 80, 90-year-old ladies out here picking their green beans. Your tomatoes are all in plain sight. Your pole beans are all in plain sight. You can grow cucumbers. Cucumbers require a bit more work to chase them up the trellis, but you can grow the cucumbers up the trellis, and they're right here. And it makes them super easy to pick. It makes them super easy to spray for bugs. And you can buy, there you go, cattle panels, $20. T-posts are about $3 a piece. But I'm going to lose this. Try not to kill anything. But because they're galvanized, they also last forever. I've never replaced one.
What did you say you told me?
Bolt cutters. I have a pair of cheap bolt cutters that I bought at Harbor Freight, I think. So I use bolt cutters to cut them in half. I cut them in half at the store because I don't have a trailer big enough to haul a 16-foot cattle panel. So I just stand there in the parking lot and cut them in half. And they don't care. So that's what we used to build trellises out of. Like I said, we've tried a lot of different things. Leaning them back a little bit. Initially, I grew them straight up. Now we lean them. Things tend to trellis a little better if you lean them a little bit. And by all means, when we're done, take a tour. There's a bazillion of them out there for you to look at. The bend in the top, man, they're not hard to bend. So you just grab on and pull. I got it at Tractor Supply. You can buy them at Tractor Supply. You can buy them at the Farmers Co-op. We shop at the Farmers Co-op over the hill just a bunch. Those two places I know have them in quantity. All right, let's talk about bugs for a minute. Because pest control is part of gardening, and if you're going to do this well, you're going to end up going, oh, wait a minute, hold on, one more. Sorry, amendments. I forgot to mention Mikos. So we're using, they make a little bag, okay? This is like the bazillion dollar bag, okay? Don't buy the big bag. I think it was $160. But, yeah, it lasts a while, though. The Mikos is mycorrhizae. It's in the professional grow mix. So we add some Mikos when we're at planting time. We're adding mycorrhizae to the planting holes. Mycorrhizae is a fungus. It's a fungus that interacts with plant roots, that helps the plant roots absorb the nutrients present in the soil. And there are is it not on your sheet? Nope, sorry. I'm using Mikos, M-Y-K-O-S. And it comes in little bags and big bags, but the little bags I think are $15, and they'll be plenty for an individual garden, okay? I mean, this is the garden. I got 90 raised beds, and this is my bag, okay? So just understand that's a lot. Mycorrhizae actually works. We've seen an improvement in our plant health I know, we got this crazy moth. Somebody, who let the mug in? There's this moth that's driving everybody crazy. And I apologize for the invader, but we do have a moth that's flying around. And the ADD person in me is like, I want to get him, I want to get him, I want to get him. I'm trying not to. I forgot to we use Mikos, we use mycorrhizae. I'd probably recommend it, but if you can't afford it and you have to cut something, cut the mycorrhizae. All right, on to pest control. The biggest pest issues you're going to have are on your tomato plants, you're going to have issues with fungus, okay? You're going to have some early blight, septoria leaf spot. That's when your plants start yellow and they got little brown spots on the leaves and they start at the bottom and then it works its way up the plant. Everybody's going to get that, okay? You're in East Tennessee, good look, like everybody's going to get it, okay? It's going to happen. The key is if you keep the plant healthy enough, you can limit the use of a fungicide like Green Cure and your plant will just outgrow it, okay? But the other real problem, fungi, so we get powdery mildew and downy mildew are a problem on all of your curcubits. So on your cucumbers, on your squash, you're going to have issues with fungus. Like we use Green Cure, okay? There again, you can buy the little version instead of the big version, but we use Green Cure. I buy it on Amazon. A small container will last you like 5 years. This one has lasted me 3 years here at the garden, and I use a lot more than you will, okay? And this is like the $40 container. So, Green Cure is potassium bicarbonate. It's edible. No, I don't recommend it. But it's an edible. It's edible. It's actually the primary preservative used in wines. So it's been used in human consumption for decades and decades. But it's incredible as a fungicide. So it's harmless to humans. You can eat it immediately. Like you can spray and eat the same day. It's not harmful to people. And if you think about it, potassium is the same kind of potassium used in the fertilizer. It's the same stuff when you eat a banana and they're like, you need to eat some potassium for your cramps. You need a banana. Like it's the same stuff. The carbon is harmless. This is a variation on a salt like baking soda. So there again, I use potassium bicarbonate because it's the best fungicide I've ever used. I typically only have to spray out here I'll spray early in the season when the fungus starts going. Like I'll spray typically every week to 10 days for about two or three sprays. And then generally I just let it go. Because by that point the plants are 5 to 6 feet tall and strong enough that they're just growing faster than the fungus can kill the leaves at the bottom of the plant. Now, I had a lady last year who was asking me, she had fungus all on the top of her plants and nobody else did. Like, nobody else had fungus on the top of their plants. And she said, I don't understand why I have fungus on the top of my plants. And I said, let me tell you how fungus spreads from the bottom to the top. You come out here and you pick the bottom leaves off, which is fine. That's part of the pruning process. And you want to tie your plants up to try to keep them on the trellises because tomatoes are not natural climbers. They want to fall down. But you didn't wash your hands. And you took the fungal spores from the bottom of the plant and put them on the top of the plant with your own bare hands, okay? You did it to yourself. Because she was like, I don't understand what these people that neglect their stuff is 8 feet tall and clean because we have tomatoes growing off the top and hers are like right here and stunted. You mothered them to death. Leave them alone. Sometimes a little bit of neglect is not a bad thing. If they've got enough moisture and they've got enough nutrients, leave them alone. and don't spread. So with fungus, you want to be careful about spreading it by your hands. And I would spray per the package instructions, but on a 7 to 10 day regimen is more than enough generally. I try not to overspray things, but this one's pretty harmless, so I'm pretty happy with it. When it comes to slugs or caterpillars, if you have issues with those, we use this one. There again. Oh, it's got a hole in the bag. I'm going to make a mess. This is Diatomaceous earth. It's also edible. It's a contact fungicide, and it works pretty well. So we use Diatomaceous earth some. It's a powder. Looks like flour. I've been baking. And don't breathe it. But you can buy a little cheap applicator and blow it on your plants, and it works for caterpillars. Caterpillars are typically only a problem early in the season. If you have... and late in the season. So we have early in the season and late in the season. Now, there are certain caterpillars. Okay, so if you have, everybody's squash plants are going to die about 75 to 80 days after you plant them. Okay, if you plant summer squash or zucchini, about 75 to 80 days after you plant them, they're going to die every single time. Because you're going to have these little moths that come in and they're going to bore into the plant. They're going to put their little caterpillars inside the stems and the caterpillars are going to kill the plants. And you're going to come out and go, why did my zucchini plant that looks so pretty just collapse one day? Because it's got a squash vine borer chewing up the insides. And you know, I have yet, if you come up with a cure for them, like, let me know. Because I have tried all of them, all right? If it's out there on the internet as try this, I've tried it and I got nothing. The only thing that does work is if you cover them up and prevent the moss from getting in. But you also prevent the pollinators from getting in, which means you have to pollinate every freaking squash by hand, and I ain't got time for that.
Peppermint or anything like that work, like spraying them?
I have had zero. Now, I haven't tried peppermint, but I have tried a bunch of them. So I've tried cinnamon, and I've tried cedar, because moths aren't supposed to like cedar.
Have you tried the BT?
I have tried BT, and I have a bottle that's just not helpful. I've tried BT, I've tried neem, I've tried diatomaceous earth, I've tried triazicide. Shouldn't say that out loud.
Have you sprayed with nematodes?
I haven't sprayed with nematodes.
Nematodes about 3 times a year.
Uh-huh.
Will help with that.
Will help.
And then using the labs on it.
So what I do with them is I plant machata type squash. So if you grow a trombetta squash, trombettas are a machata type squash, which means they have a solid stem. Like all of the machata family are going to have solid stems. The machata types don't get killed by vine borers. The problem is the plants are ginormous. Okay, so I'll show you some pictures, but I've got them growing over a gazebo, like over an arbor. Okay, and the squash get to be 3 feet long, 4 feet long. They're really fun, but you can eat them all the way to 3 feet long. They taste just like a zucchini. Actually, they're a little sweeter than a zucchini. And they freeze better. So I grow trombettas because the borers don't kill them. And so I would recommend trying something different. I have trombetta seeds. If you want some, let me know. But other things, Mexican bean beetles are probably the bane of my gardening existence here. Okay, because we grow a lot of beans, and bean beetles are bad. There's always a bean pressure. And you end up using pyrethrin whether you want to or not. Okay, so pyrethrin is made from the chrysanthemum flower. You can buy the organic version or the inorganic version. The inorganic version is called permethrin. The organic version is called pyrethrin. The organic, I think the one we use is called Pyganic, which is an organic version of pyrethrin. You can buy permethrin at the co-op or about anywhere else. Triazicide is a pyrethrin derivative. Not all you organic people stay away from triazicide, but if you're not organic and the bean beetles are killing your beans, triazicide will work. The downside to, and don't ever use 7 because 7 will kill you and everything else. But triazicide is moderately long lasting. So I'm not going to go into all the details on organic versus inorganic, but the bottom line is if you're using pyrethrin, like Pyganic, which is a derivative of the chrysanthemum flower, and it works really well. It kills everything that touches it for about 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, it breaks down into compounds that are harmless, which is great if you're going to eat the vegetables right thereafter. The downside to it is that if the bean beetles don't get killed in the first 24 hours, your poison's no longer effective. So the inorganic versions, like a triazicide, for example, linger for about 4 days. So you got about 4 days of coverage, and you tend to have a little better success. I use triazicide in very, very limited quantities, but usually primarily when I can't get the bean beetles under control with Pyganic. So Pyganic will work most of the time, but sometimes the pressure is just too heavy, and you're going to lose your beans. You got to make a call there. If you use an inorganic, you need to read the label, and if it says don't eat for 5 days, they mean it. Okay, like if this says don't eat for 5, don't pick the veggies for 3 days or 5 days or whatever. That's how long it takes for the chemical in there to break down into something else. And if it's persistent for 3 to 5 days, don't feed it to your youngins. Okay. It's also why if you buy inorganic produce at the store, which I buy all the time, wash it. Like it's got stuff on it that you don't want to eat. It just does. If you buy organic produce, wash it. It's covered in stuff. They sprayed that I got a friend who's a strawberry farmer, man. They use, for their organic stuff, they spray it in spinosad about every other day. It'll make you sick. Don't eat it. Wash. And then we use beetle baggers. We use the Bonite beetle baggers to catch Japanese beetles. They work really well. You can buy them at the co-op. You hang them up and watch them go. And the beetles are like, they fly across. And me and Alan were out there hanging it up. He's like, how long do you think it's going to take? We'd hung the thing up for about 10 minutes. Here he comes. they hit the little orange, yellow plastic. It's got a pheromone trap, man. They're like, hey, I'm about to get laid. And then they die. It's terrible. But they're flying to their death.
I have an issue with drug worms, and they're actually in my raised pots now. Any help for that? Because it's a beetle.
Yes, I know. There's a soil drench, and I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. So there is a soil drench for one of those that works for grubs, that kills the grubs, that is organic. And I think it's a pyrethrin derivative that's I think there's a pyrethrin that you can pour through.
Correct me on that.
I will. I'm pretty sure it's a pyrethrin derivative that you can kill the grubs with. Pretty expensive if you were doing it in a yard, but in a pot would probably be not that big a deal.
I've got 100 pots. 25 gallon pots.
You're going to probably spend some money, but I think we can probably fix it. It's probably cheaper than dumping out all the stuff. Okay. I'm going to skip the plant and seed sources. They're great, but look them up because it's already after 11 and we're still going. All right, let's talk about where you plant stuff. So you should have on the back side, you have this pretty little diagram. Well, this one looks like ours. If you use boards, you're not going to have the little brick barrier, okay? Ours has brick barriers, so I built this for us. And it says, over here, it says back row. This is the stuff you should put in the back row. And it tells you how many you should put there. Like it says middle rows, and it tells you what and how many to put per square. Then it says down on the front. It also has a description of, all right, so on the back, you can put tomatoes, cucumbers, pole beans or lima beans, winter squash. The Gauls aren't here today because they had a conflict, but the first year they didn't read the sheet, and so they planted one pole bean per hole. They planted 4 pole beans across the back of their trellis. And then they came and asked me, okay, why does theirs look like it's all lush and it's covered in beans, and ours looks like spindly? I said, well, how many did you plant? And they said 1. I said, the sheet says 9 per square. I said, you got 4 plants. I said, they got 36 in the same space. Oh, that's why theirs looks lush and full, okay? Like, beans don't require much soil, and they lay over each other, kind of competing for sunlight, but because they make their own nitrogen, they don't need that much. So they do really well. So you can plant pole beans or lima beans at like 9 per square and pack them in, and they're going to cover like a whole trellis with all be beans, and it'll produce beans all season long. And they'll produce beans until you get tired of picking the beans, and they just hang there and go to seed. And then you're like, now I got Shelly beans, all right? So 9 per square. If you plant 1 per square, you're going to go like, why is this trellis not covered? Okay. Well, the winter squash, 1 per 2 squares. Winter squash you can grow successfully. You kind of have to keep them on the trellis. They're going to kind of want to go everywhere. And you may have to limit them to like, if you're going to try and grow them with other things, you're going to have to limit them to like 2 squares and push them up the trellis. This trellis isn't close to big enough for a full-size winter squash plant. Winter squash are in the pumpkin family. How big do they get? Kyle grew some accidentally. A trombetta squash will grow up this, down to the ground. You can bring it over, and it'll go back up this and down to the ground in a season. Okay, you can easily get 30 to 40 feet of vine out of a trombetta squash plant. This is an 8-foot trellis, so you got 3 loops. All right, you can just keep putting them back up there, or you can just let them go across your yard. But then you got to walk around. But put them on the back row. It says this is on a 4x4. Yep, this is on a 4x4, and each of these represents 1 square foot. Okay, there again, we're hijacking the square foot gardening method. So I have a whole guide, this plant spacing, that I didn't print 100 copies of. But if you want a guide to the plant spacing and what that little diagram looks like, just let me know. I'll print you a copy. Middle rows and then the front row. In ours, because we're using concrete blocks, our front row gets jacked up a little bit. You can see that. So we just plant short stuff in the front. Carrots, lettuce, radishes, those kinds of things. And I got a whole explanation of that. Okay, a couple of things. Like things that don't grow well in this setup, corn does not grow well. You really need a 1/4 acre of corn to get good pollination, which means you are not going to grow it well. I have put 64 ears of corn into a raised bed to see what happened. It worked really well until the thunderstorm blew it all down, okay? I went, okay. People are like, hey, have you tried a Three Sisters? Yep, that doesn't work well either. Because the squash plant is too big. If you try a Three Sisters, I've got the corn up, and the corn is not going to pollinate, but I tried to use it as the trellis just for the sake of history, right? So I got my little corn plants in there. Squash plants are not 4x4, man. Like if you plant winter squash in there like you're supposed to, squash plant, like a pumpkin goes 20 by 20, okay? And so it takes over everything. You need more room for Three Sisters, all right? It doesn't work. It will work, but it won't work in this setup, okay? We've tried watermelons, we've grown watermelons. We've got some fun pictures of square watermelons that grew out and fell into the block and then got square. You can grow watermelons successfully in this setup. You just have to be willing to let them sprawl outside the beds and keep the roots in the bed and let them sprawl out along the path. They're fine. You can grow watermelons that way, but they're not going to stay trained into your beds. Your cucumber, you can try, we've got some different trellises I can show you, like a square trellis you can put cucumbers on that will go up the trellis inside the bed, put them in a square, grow them up the middle, that works pretty well. But this is before you plant. You plant. And so you sit here with your little diagram and you draw out, I'm putting this many of what in. Grow what you eat. Okay, just note, don't plant anything you don't intend to eat because it's going to sit there and produce seeds that are going to rot into your garden and grow next year. Okay? Ask me about okra. People are like, yay, okra! Okra does really well. You put a couple of okra plants in there, they get about this tall. You can actually plant other things under them late in the season. You plant your fall stuff under the okra because it's tall by the late season. But like okra goes to seed too, y'all. Now, a note on weeding. Okay, so you're going to have to plant all your stuff. Because you don't have any weeds that have deep, deep roots. All the weeds are growing in grow mix. Have you ever pulled a weed out of potting soil? Bloop. It just picks right out. Now, it might take the soil with it because you may pick up a plant and like, here's a quarter, you're like, whoa, like here's these little bitty roots and here's the little bitty plant, here's all the big roots full of dirt. Put your dirt back in the hole. Like, you paid for that dirt, put it back. You know, when we got little kids out here at garden camp, and we make them spend a day weeding, we're like, okay, be sure when you pull the weeds up, don't throw the dirt in the bin, man. Like the weeds go in the bin, the dirt goes back in the hole because you paid for that dirt. Weeding takes 5 to 10 minutes. The only weeds that are going to be there are ones that sprouted, so they're going to have little seeds. If you will walk through once a week and go, whoop, there's a weed. They're like this tall. You just pick them. And it takes about 5 minutes a week to manage a bed and pull all the weeds out. And you're going to get to August. And if you've done this, you're going to get to August and you're going to be at an event talking to a friend and they're going to be griping about how the drought's killing their tomatoes. And they're going to be griping about what they saw on the internet about I had a guy come up to me and say, I read this trick for growing tomatoes. I said, well, how are your tomatoes doing? So mine are all dead. I said, mine are 9 feet tall right now. You'll see a picture. I just took one the other day, and they're like off the top of the trellis. He said, how did you do that? I said, it wasn't a trick I learned on the internet. Okay? It was good soil with good moisture and preventing the weeds. If you give the plant the best nutrition possible, you have minimal issues with pests. Because the other thing is plants are designed by God to resist the disease. They try to outgrow it. So if you give them lots of moisture and lots of sunlight and lots of nutrition, they'll generally beat the disease.
So I had last year my tomatoes right when they ripened. I go to pick them, and apparently the birds are pecking them.
Oh yeah. So mockingbirds are a pain in the tomatoes. All right. They do the same thing to mine. Okay, so there are 2 ways to beat the mockingbirds. One more effective than another, but. Like 2 ways to beat the mockingbirds, because if you let your tomatoes go all the way to ripe, vine ripened is an illusion. They do not need to be vine ripened, okay? So as soon as your tomato blushes color, you can pick that thing, put it on the counter, and let it ripen, and it will ripen to the same flavor. That beats the mockingbirds. Sometimes you just have to beat them to it and go, okay, these are getting ready to ripen and they blush, because as soon as that thing turns red, the mockingbird's going to poke some holes in it. The other thing is provide the mockingbirds with a source of water. So if you this is where your bird bath comes in. Put in a bird bath so that they have an easily accessible water source, because they're not actually eating the tomatoes. They're drinking the water out of the middle. So they're poking. That's why they're not eating a big chunk out. If something's eating a chunk out of your tomato, it's a squirrel or something, okay? But if mockingbirds are poking holes in your tomato, it's generally because they're thirsty, especially in August, September, October, when like we have a drought and there's not as much rainwater and puddles around for them to drink out of. They're going to start going, that tomato's full of water, and they're going to go poke a hole in it. And you're going to go, I have a hole in my beautiful tomato. So add a water fixture. Put a bird bath out there, keep it full.
My tomatoes were splitting, like they would have a crack. Is that from the
Okay, yes. So oftentimes, some of it is variety specific. So some are more prone to cracking than others. But usually what happens when the tomatoes split is the moisture level changed dramatically one way or the other. So what happens is if the tomatoes are, if we have, let's say we have a week with no rain and your soil gets really dry. And then we get a thunderstorm, and all of a sudden the soil goes from dry to wet. What happened is that tomato skin got a little bit brittle, and then the tomato, when all of a sudden it had all that water, it tried to push it into the tomato and it split. So the solution to splitting most of the time is keep the moisture level even. And if you keep the moisture level even, you'll have much less issues with splitting, split tops. Some varieties are going to split a little on top anyway, but you'll have much less issues with splitting if you keep the water level even. So let's just say that they don't get super dry because you're using a drip system during the week, and you keep that moisture level kind of it's in the green all the time. And then you get a thunderstorm, they get too much moisture, they generally don't split because the skin never got brittle. So that will help. But usually it's, that also tends to be your issues with blossom end rot. So the blackening on the bottom of the tomatoes tends to be a moisture issue. Because if it gets too dry, the plant can't absorb the calcium that it needs to keep the skin sturdy, and then they tend to black out on the bottom. Other questions about specific things?
What do you use for tomato cages? Fat?
My tomatoes grow right up that thing. Because if you're going to grow a 10-foot tall tomato plant, the little cages that they sell at the store stink. Okay, they didn't. I mean, like they're great for seedlings, but they don't actually hold a real tomato. So no, my tomato plants out here will all grow in the back row, and we will weave them. You just kind of push them through the trellis and weave them up, and by the end of the year, they all off the top of the trellis. And I mean, it's not. At some point, you go, okay, I'm running out of trellis, and you prune them back to the limb down here and let them grow from the bottom. But
So, past 2 years we've tried to raise
Uh-huh.
boxes. And we put our plants in, they grow, they bloom beautifully, the blue falls off, and we get nothing.
okay, usually that's a nitrogen issue. So you got too much green stuff in your bed. So usually, if you're getting flowers but no fruit, most of the time, sometimes it's just heat. If you have a midsummer, June, July, sometimes you'll have blossoms set in June, July. If it's over 85 degrees outside, plants have a harder time. Most things, tomatoes, peppers be the exception. Tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, and stuff will blossom drop pretty badly, meaning they'll form them and then drop them and not sell them because they don't like the heat. But the other issue is if you've got too much nitrogen in the soil, and there again, we're using 2 cups at most. More is not better. Okay, where it says 2 cups in a 4x4, if you use 4, you're going to screw it up. Okay, I'll just tell you that. Ask me how I know. Things I've done wrong. Like if this is good, add a little more. Nope. All my stuff. I had 1 year where that bed didn't work at all. What did I do there? Oh, I tried 4 cups of fertilizer. Oops. So usually blossom drop is either it's too much heat or it's too much nitrogen. So and by using compost as our primary fertilizer source, we don't get too much. There was another question. Yep.
When do you start planting?
We plant all. Okay, so our spring stuff you can plant now. We did the spring planting workshop a month ago. Like this planting workshop would be for a summer garden, so all this stuff is summer oriented, so you have time to build your stuff. We plant ours Mother's Day weekend. So Mother's Day weekend is our last frost date is usually sometime between May the 7th and May the 14th. And so we don't want to plant early. Trust me, it's too much risk unless you have a lot of time to baby and keep your stuff alive. I have a neighbor, he's a dear sweet guy. He loves his tomato plants. He's retired, so he has all kinds of time to baby his stuff. Right? And he takes his tomato plants, his are like in April 15th, his are in the ground. But he's building little galoshes around them, and he builds little mini greenhouses to put over them. Can I tell you how much sooner his tomatoes are ripe than mine? Maybe a week. He's in the ground 3 weeks before me, maybe. But his stuff doesn't ripen any faster because they don't like the cold soil. So the other thing about ours is we're going to have warm soil in this raised bed because the top 8 inches of dirt is going to warm up quicker. And so we're going to plant stuff about Mother's Day, and we're going to start to harvest stuff like your early. So your summer squash, which is kind of your first off, it's 40 days. So if you plant it Mother's Day, you'll have summer squash before the 4th of July. Your tomatoes, if we transplant those out Mother's Day, our first tomatoes will come off mid-July, and the main harvest will come off mid-August, but they'll keep going until frost. So usually Mother's Day weekend is our plant out day.
What about the late summer ones that got listed like broccoli?
So late summer stuff, we would start seeds for late summer stuff. If you're going to do it from seed, I would plant your seeds July 1st and look to transplant them out by Labor Day. And so you're roughly 8 weeks there from seed to transplant. But for your late summer stuff, we're looking to plant our stuff out, our fall stuff, about Labor Day weekend, kind of as a fall. That gives us about 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost and 8 weeks before harvest.
Pumpkins, right?
Huh?
Is that pumpkins like, would pumpkins fall into late summer?
No, I would plant. No, pumpkins I would plant Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, pumpkins I'd put them in Mother's Day. Other questions?
What can we plant now?
What you can plant now? You can plant radishes now. You can plant carrots now. You can plant. You can buy transplants for cabbages or all the brassicas, broccoli, etc. You can plant those now. If you buy them from transplants, you have a chance to get them in. You can plant around the sugar snap peas. Probably still get them out by mid-May. You might push your tomatoes out 2 weeks if you do that and put them in the same spot, but you can do that and get around the sugar snap peas in before the tomatoes need to go. Your tomatoes can go in as late as June 1st, okay? Just so you know, because I want you to understand that in my life, sometimes my life gets crazy trying to help everybody else get their stuff planted. There have been years when my stuff didn't go in the ground at the house until June 1st because I was trying to get everybody else's stuff in the ground, and they still did fine. So, question?
If we wanted to like start our bed over again, this method, what would we do with that dirt that's in there? Like, can we add it to compost?
It depends. I can't answer that because I don't know what's in the current starter, like what's in your current mix. Like, I would find a spot for it and plant a bush in it. Go get you a couple of blueberry bushes and plant it. Use it as a mound and plant some blueberries in it or something. Is probably what I would do. I would find me a spot for a blueberry bush and put it in it. And I would start over. I mean, sorry, having screwed enough of them up. I'm not saying it's not useful, but I would find a place where, okay, something like a blueberry bush, which, by the way, they grow really well. So in East Tennessee, try a couple of those, or plant your hydrangeas or whatever. Use them to landscape with. Don't throw the dirt away. Go find a spot in your landscape that needs it. Plant your hydrangeas in it or something. Other questions?
What do you suggest to keep away groundhogs, rabbits, and deer?
So, what did he say? 223. Okay, well, in all seriousness, we have a deer issue. So we fixed the deer issue with a 9-foot fence. Okay, and so we have a 9-foot fence out here to keep the deer out. And they found their way around the fence, so we got a bunch of dog hair from the vet. We also have a remote control barking dog. His name's Rex. I'm not kidding. Like, I should have brought Rex in, but we have a remote control barking dog who's motion activated. So if you walk out there at night, he goes. She's got motion activated lights.
They'll flash and they'll run from those.
So I have yet to find something that works for rabbits, and we don't have but groundhog. If you know you have a groundhog issue, like my suggestion would be take some cheap chicken wire and put it in the bottom of your beds, because you can buy not the 1-inch stuff. Like you can buy like the hardware cloth. That's the small hardware cloth. You can probably buy a roll of the hardware cloth for $10 or $15. Put hardware cloth in the bottoms of your beds. That will keep the groundhogs from coming up through them. If I knew that was an issue where I lived, I'd be putting hardware cloth in the bottom of my beds. Yep.
So would that mean, since I'm way up the mountains, way from everything, I kind of need to like
Yeah.
cage rid of it, indoor drop it, or would that be silly?
No, I mean, look,
They
what
would kind of live with me, or
are you talking about? If you're talking about groundhogs, Like,
Or chipmunks or whatever.
so we have Nutria, right? The great big groundhogs. We have them here, and we use live traps to catch them and haul them off. And if I can't catch them, we're in town, so I call animal control and be like, I've got a groundhog who's driving us crazy, and they'll set up traps. So live traps will work for the big groundhogs. I bait them with cantaloupe. Like,
So you wouldn't do the fencing inside the thing?
you could absolutely do it. Like, I just wouldn't do it on this scale, but I might do it on a small scale at your house. Like, uh-huh.
That's a $3 too. They
Uh-huh.
don't- they don't. I mean,
I'm here. The sun is shining, so by all means, take a tour. The drip system is pretty cool. Like 2 weeks from now, we do the potting up workshop. So if you missed the tomatoes workshop, I'll have some extra seedlings at the potting up workshop, which is in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, we'll take our tomatoes from their little current seedling stage and put them in bigger pots. That's 2 weeks from today. And then we take a break because it's Easter. So 4 weeks from that one is the irrigation workshop, and we'll talk about drip irrigation. In our system, we actually catch the water off the roof of the building, put it into a pond, and then pump it from the pond through the drip system. But I'll show you how to do it from your house if you want in a small scale. So we'll talk about that because we need to irrigate the front beds, and we didn't do that last year. So we're going to build that system in April. Any other questions that you have for me? Well, I will be here if you want to ask them after. I'm going to end on the video. Thank you all for being here.
thank you.